Hello, this is Fred at the Gate with today's devotional. In 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 5, in the New International Version, you'll find these words printed. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. My brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you to understand what happens when you give yourself to God first. This is really incredible here. Your physical distribution will not determine your spiritual disposition. In other words, notice they were in the midst of a severe trial, the Apostle Paul says, and their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. Now, that sounds like a paradox. Overwhelming joy, extreme poverty. For many of us, we can't fathom being in the same place of both of those at the same time, being extremely impoverished and having overflowing joy. But it is possible because our joy comes from the Lord. And so, please be mindful. No matter what your physical distribution is or is not, your spiritual disposition should not change. Now, God places the super on our natural ability. So that makes it supernatural. Notice what it says. He says, verse 3, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. Again, another paradox. They gave as much as they were able and then beyond their ability. So God places that super on your and my natural that makes it supernatural. What's impossible for you and I is truly possible for God. There are no limitations, and that's how they were able to do it. Why? Because they gave themselves to God first, my brothers and sisters. When you give yourself to God first, then everything else that accompanies you is given to God. Everything you possess accompanies you. So when you give yourself to God first, you're giving him your time, you're giving him your talents, you're giving him your treasures. Why? Because you gave yourself to God first, and everything that comes along with you goes to God. And so also, when you give yourself to God first, you understand the privilege to participate with God. Notice what they said. At the tail end of verse 3, it says, entirely on their own, meaning nobody coerced them or forced them or manipulated, entirely on their own. Verse 4 says, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the Lord's people. And then they exceeded the expectations of the Apostle Paul. When you give yourself to God first and you understand the privilege to participate with God, then everything that you possess, you realize it belongs to him, and so it needs to be used for his purpose. My brothers and sisters, when you give yourself to God first, you realize that no matter what you have in the way of a physical distribution, it doesn't dictate or determine your spiritual disposition. You can have overflowing joy in the midst of poverty-stricken situations, in the midst of severe trials. When God places his super on our natural, that's when we're able to do what appeared to be impossible for us, but very possible for God. And so, when you understand that it is indeed a privilege, you participate with what God is doing, you want to give it your best and give it your all when first you give in yourself to God.